Great. So this is week 87 of our weekly discussions. And this week we asked the question, do Givewell charities create unhealthy dependence? And the date today is July 24th. So EA is two things. It's an idea, the idea of maximizing the good you can do through your career, your projects, and your donations. It's also a community of many individuals and orgs that care about this idea and gather around it. So in EA, or rather in the world more broadly, when we hear foreign aid and when we think about international development, it's very common to come across this criticism of dependency. I'm linking here just a Heritage Foundation article about foreign aid, where one commentator, James Roberts, talks about how we should break the cycle of dependency. He asks this question, why do some nations that receive US foreign aid year after year never seem to improve? Why don't they develop better institutions and have sustainable growth, even after we're pouring billions and billions of dollars at them? He cites a few examples like El Salvador and Sierra Leone. And you don't have to just look at this article. I mean, there are just countless articles on the internet and also countless critiques of foreign aid and of efforts to redistribute resources to people in lower middle income countries. Yeah, and so it calls into the question, oh, does this create dependency, and what is the nature of this dependency? I think one idea is that if we just give handouts to people, we're not actually teaching a man to, it goes back to the old analogy, right? You can give a man a fish, feed him for a day. You can teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. When we give resources to people in lower middle income countries, we're not teaching them how to fish. We're just handing them resources. That's one of the big criticisms. We're not focusing on job creation. We're not focusing on trade, which are two major drivers of growth, as they talk about in this Brookings report. There's also this criticism that we're not giving people what they really want. And it creates also this kind of paternalistic relationship between those who give and those who receive, that being respectively the West and lower middle income countries. So other criticisms that come up that are related to dependency is this idea of corruption in lower middle income countries, or rather aid recipient countries, corruptions in the governments that receive this aid. There are many examples, food aid, where governments just take massive chunks out for paying salaries and like exorbitant executive salaries, and sometimes not even it's justified as like actual salaries. Sometimes it's just like it disappears in bank accounts. And yeah, there's this criticism that is also just not sustainable. There's this idea that that many have about development, which is that it should at some point be self-sustaining. And there are many ways something can become self-sustaining. One way is that perhaps a government takes on the costs that at the beginning private donors were taking on. So imagine philanthropists fund a project and they pay for it for the first few years. And once the value of this project is seen by the aid recipients or by the government of that aid, either the recipients or their government take on the project and bear the costs and allow it to continue into perpetuity. And many criticize aid by saying that, well, we're funding projects that can't be transferred. We'll just have to fund them forever. And then another criticism here is that, well, we might actually fund a project, but then stop funding it and leave this kind of vacuum that a country has to fill. Maybe the private sector has to fill it. Maybe the government has to fill it. But if you have this kind of stop-start aid, then it might create disruptions that were even worse than the initial problem. So that's a criticism that I've come across a lot. And the question is, well, can we apply these criticisms to Givewell charities? In what ways are they similar to foreign aid? In what ways are they different? And I just want to ask a few questions here, not go into too much depth of answering these questions, but are these criticisms justified for Givewell charities? Also, do these charities create unhealthy dependence, and are they sustainable? So there's a lot of directions we can go here. One resource that I found very helpful on this was a was a recent 80,000 Hours podcast on this topic with the founder of Evidence Action. I think her name's Karen Levy, and she talked a lot about this idea of sustainability. And I just want to share one thing that she shared that I found incredibly helpful is this idea that, well, it's quite difficult oftentimes for development programs to be sustainable, and maybe thinking of sustainability isn't the right way to think about it if what sustainable means is that once you reach some certain project success, you can transfer it over to the government, and for many reasons. I mean, one reason is that a lot of GiveWell programs are funding projects for people in very poor countries. A lot of these projects, let's take deworming, for instance, through which one here works with deworming? SCI Foundation. When they do deworming in a country like Kenya, for instance, they're often providing a resource that the government of Kenya can't easily provide. And you might say, well, if it's so important, the government of Kenya should try to provide it. And it's just not that simple, Karen says. So I think that's interesting. That's an interesting question to ask ourselves with Givewell Charities. Like, are the resources or the services that Givewell Charities are providing things that that foreign nationals could be providing or not? And if they tried to provide it, how long would it take for them to establish quote unquote sustainable programs? Karen Levy is not so optimistic about that. And maybe it does come at a cost of some other programs in these poor countries, and really at the end of the day, it costs the taxpayer in these foreign countries. And many of these taxpayers are just by definition poor, because a country is not richer than its taxpayers. So it's quite difficult to have sustainable government funding. The interview also had some really interesting criticisms of this, but I'll just leave it at that, and we can discuss further.